Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to start our session soon, so we invite you to take your seat. I know the CCUS team was debating and very excited. We're going to talk about CCUS as well, so I invite you to also continue sitting with us. All right. Okay, can I invite you all standing in the hallway to take your seat? We're gonna start in 1 minute. Good evening and welcome to this session. The interplay of low carbon technologies for resilient net zero energy systems. Absolutely an attractive title to keep you entertained at this very late hour of the day. I know you're all exhausted and been through a lot of discussions and activities, but the topic nevertheless remains extremely important. My name is Tariq Mtaira. I am the Director of the Decarbonization of the Decarbonization Sustainable Energy at the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, UNIDO, and I'm going to be your host for the evening. So, ladies and gentlemen, this event is about decarbonizing the energy system and to get to net zero. We know that there is an increasing consensus that all possible low-carbon technologies will be needed to decarbonize our energy systems, whether in the electricity sector or in the hard-to-abate sectors, especially those that cannot be easily decarbonized and where carbon-free fuels, such as hydrogen and synthetic fuels, can substitute fossil fuels. So this event brings together three international agencies, came together to organize the International Atomic Energy Agency, UNECE, United Nations Commission for Central and Eastern Europe, UNIDO, together to discuss and present to you the challenges and the opportunities. So central to the challenge that is being posed here, that we know that these technologies, we have a variety of technologies and there's a bit of debate on these technologies, but as I said, the consensus is we need all technologies on the table. The central challenge is how do we deploy them at scale and at speed across geographies, both in developed and developing economies, to meet our net zero goal. So this is the central question that we are dealing with today, and kickstarting us is keynote welcome speeches from the three heads of agencies. So I would like to start with invite Mr. Rafael Grossi, the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, to the podium to deliver his welcome remarks.
Thank you very much, Director Tarek. Thank you for leading us into this conversation. It's a real pleasure and an honor to be sharing the podium with my good friend, the Director General of UNIDO, Gerd Müller, and Olga Algayerova, with whom we go back a few years in joint work as former ambassadors for our respective countries in Vienna, and now she in Geneva, leading the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. This opportunity, like you were rightly saying, at the end of the day, and days here tend to be long and hectic, but hopefully also charged with good conversations, with good interactions. And I could not think of a better way to end this working day by having something that even from the title itself of the event is talking about joining forces, joining efforts, which is exactly what I think the world expects from everybody when it comes to something that has been rightly described as an existential problem, an existential threat even has been described by the Secretary General in his liminal message to all of us when he started us this week here at COP27. The approach we take at the IAEA is precisely this, is the approach of an articulation of low carbon systems, which is what we require if we are to get anywhere near what is needed at this point in time. And of course, from the perspective and the point of view of the IAEA, we are here addressing the problem from the perspective of an energy source that is producing, as we speak, not less than 25% of all the clean energy which is produced right now in the world. So we are not talking about something which is an idea, a prospect, a possibility. It's something that is happening right now in the world. And when we look at what happens in Europe, it's 50% of the clean energy which is produced in that continent. And when we talk about the United States, it's also 50%. And I could continue with the statistics, but just to say that the contribution in the face of this very serious problem that we have, that is coming and can come from nuclear, is very visible, except for those who don't want to see it, which is also part of the reality that we have and that we need to discuss openly. This is why we welcome opportunities like this to exchange views with those who may have different takes on the problems. But the fact of the matter is that we need to take an approach that is feasible, that is realistic, and that can be put to good use immediately. And it is in this sense that we are seeing our work as in perfect harmony and articulation with other low-carbon energy systems and sources. By definition, nuclear energy is a baseload energy, which fulfills this function very effectively in countries that are already using it. So when facing the challenge we are facing, and when thinking about the future, and when thinking about the sort of ambitious goals that the international community has set for itself, we need to be pragmatic, we need to be realistic, and we need to be science-based on the pathways, on the ideas and the plans we put to get there. And what we are seeing at the moment is an undeniable interest in nuclear energy, not only in the countries that have been benefiting from the peaceful uses of nuclear energy all over the world, and here, of course, I can cite the cases of many countries in Europe, France, the United Kingdom, the entire Eastern European part of the world, crescent, when every single country that has nuclear is increasing. Czechia, Slovakia, Bulgaria, Romania, Hungary, even Poland, the only country in Eastern Europe which did not have nuclear Energy has just made a very important announcement of an ambitious program with an United Nations, United States very important corporation to launch quite a big and ambitious nuclear power program. So this is something which is very important, and we have to notice and to take note of. And sometimes we have the impression that people are not seeing this to their detriment, I would say, because this is the reality, this is the real world, this is what's happening in reality. But not only that, we see this in the Global South, as it is called these days. We see it in South Africa, who has just confirmed that their nuclear program continues and it is going to be increased. We see it in India, that is building 8 more nuclear reactors, not to speak about China, which at the moment and as we speak is building 18 nuclear reactors, or Argentina, which is adding, or Brazil, Mexico, and so on and so forth. Does this mean that we have a nuclear energy wave? No. And I would even say, unfortunately, not, because when I read what the IEA, not the IAEA, the International Energy Agency, which is the energy think tank of the OECD in Paris, they are saying at least double nuclear energy, at the very least. Or the IPCC, which is a reference analytical group in the context of the COPs that is saying no path to net zero can exclude nuclear energy. Our perspective here, ladies and gentlemen, is not the perspective of nuclear lobbyists, commercial actors in this effort. It is one of an international organization that is trying to articulate with other organizations, hence my satisfaction at being sharing the podium with the UN industry chief, Gerd, or Olga here. I believe that there is a lot that can be done, there is a lot that we can do collectively and individually if we simply decide to work together in a collaborative way. And this is really the whole thing about our effort and the way we are trying to work. Let me, to end, note also that this COP is taking place in Africa, and hardly a week passes without me seeing a Minister of Energy of an African country that comes to my desk and says, we also want nuclear energy. Nuclear energy is also for us in Africa, in particular when it comes to new designs like small and modular reactors that can be adapted to smaller grids, to economies with less resources. So the effort is global, the possibilities are there, the articulations are at our reach if we simply decide to do it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, Mr. Rafael Grossi, and for really pointing out the opportunities and the growth and demand in terms of the technology, as you highlighted, coming from Latin America, Africa, and other countries. And I would hope that we would use the panel discussion to unpack some of the challenges in ramping up the deployment at the speed that is required, but also addressing the financing challenges that some of these countries are tackling with. With this note, natural transition to Her Excellency Ms. Olga Algayerova, I hope I get it right, Executive Secretary for the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Close to you.
Okay. So, good evening, dear friends, and I really appreciate that you are listening to us at this later hour, but it's important discussion, I believe. And I'm very happy to be here with Rafael, with Gerd, because IAEA and UNIDO are our valued partners. So why we are here today? Because we see that the national actions and also the international commitments under the Paris Agreement simply fall short to deliver to the warming below 1.5 degrees. Well, but we still see the hope, the light at the end of the tunnel. Okay? It is still possible, and the topic of today is interplay of low-carbon energy systems. While Rafael was speaking about the importance of nuclear energy that has its place on this interplay, I want to speak a little bit broader about this interplay and how we see it at UNECE. By the way, UNECE is one of the 5 United Nations regional commissions. I see our colleagues from African Commission, who is acting executive secretary. I see African Union here with us. So good evening, thank you for coming. And our region, UNECE region, is 56 member states. This is the EU, is the former Soviet Union, is the Balkans, is the North America. So this is our region that we cover. And what I'm going to tell you now on this interplay is a result of work of experts out of all these 56 countries. So how it is still possible? How this pathway is achievable for our member states, for the countries around the world? So exactly through the interplay. And what do we mean by interplay? It's all low and zero carbon technologies to be used in a holistic way. We need to use renewable energies. We need to speak about efficiency and improve it, of course. We need to speak about carbon capture, carbon storage, use and storage. We need to speak about hydrogen. We need to speak about nuclear energy, and we need to speak about sustainable use of natural resources. We need to speak about the critical raw materials. So it's not just one element how we still can do it. And again, it must be done in a holistic way and use all available low and zero carbon technologies and strategies. But what we need to do is we need to take the action now. There is no other option. Take the action now. We produced at UNECE so-called carbon neutral toolkit that is a very good tool for policymakers for them to make informed decisions, because this interplay of technologies, of course, each country has its unique circumstances, and another mix of those tools is suitable for that particular country. So this carbon neutrality toolkit serves policymakers to make informed decisions towards implementation of, in our understanding, 2030 Agenda, Paris Agreement, and all that. Of course, international cooperation is very important, so we shouldn't exclude anybody from that, because all of us, we are responsible and we are all on board and sharing benefits and risks of non-action. I have here some 4 points. It's a result of the best experts from our region. We gathered them to work on solutions to build such interplay energy system. And the data, scientific data, and are showing us, and these experts found that carbon neutral energy systems consist of diversifying primary and final energy supply, accelerating phase out of unabated fossil fuels, electrifying all sectors through renewable energy and nuclear power, and scaling up innovative low and zero carbon technologies. I already mentioned the importance of the critical raw materials is another topic that we could speak the whole night, but without them we cannot do this transition a success. So I would stop here. Thank you for your attention. I believe we will still have continuation of this fruitful discussion. Thank you for your attention again.
Thank you, Ms. Olga, Executive Secretary, UNECE. Let me also invite His Excellency, Mr. Gerd Müller, Director General of the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, to deliver his welcome remarks.
Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues here. We all know climate change is the single greatest threat we are facing together as one planet. But, and that is my message, there are solutions. And this COP, we must talk much more about what is the way for solutions. And that tonight we discuss about solutions. But what is very important, that is the COP in Africa for Africa. And the effects of climate change hit developing countries hardest. I visited a lot of African pavilions. Africa must be in the center of this COP. The consequences of climate change there is very, very hard. And industrialized countries have a very particular responsibility for the consequences of climate change. Why? Because the G20 are responsible for 80% of CO2 emissions in the world. So there could be the solutions. But this question is not at the table of the G20. The G20 are responsible for 80% of CO2 emissions. And Africa, the whole continent, 54 different countries for 3 or 4% of CO2 emissions. That is the situation. And therefore the international community has agreed that we need to use all possible low carbon technologies to decarbonize energy systems. And as the Director General of UNIDO, Industrial Development Organization, my goal is to provide concrete and practical solutions to pressing global challenges, progress by innovation. And we want to advance technological solutions to reduce emissions while also encouraging economic growth, because the key question is how to decouple economic growth that will happen, that must happen, especially in the developing countries the next few years, of course, decouple economic growth with CO2 emissions. And that is possible. Two very concrete messages. Carbon capture and storage. A realistic strategy for CO2-free production is fossil fuel sources with carbon capture technologies. 80% of the total production demand of energy worldwide is still fossil-based. We need an answer there. And CO2 storage and utilization, for example, for the production of synthetic fuels. The technologies are here. They are being used already amongst others in US, for example, or in Norway. Yeah, but nearly nobody is talking about this here at this COP27. That are solutions. And let me tell you, more than 10 billion tons of CO2 emissions in the energy sector, in the chemical industry, and in steel and cement production could be avoided in this way. 10 billion, not million, billion tons. So that is something we should and must talk about this. A second point, nature-based solutions. We must preserve and strengthen the planet's capacity to adapt. CO2 is not a poison. Nature-based solutions, therefore, are from central importance. And with consistent action, for example, mangrove protection, for example, rainforest protection, with consistent action in these sectors, and level of 10 billion tons of negative emissions could be achieved by 2050. So that is what we should and must talk about, and that is something concrete. Ladies and gentlemen, to realize the zero carbon economy of tomorrow, of the future, we must use all the options at our disposal, all options. This is why UNIDO's approach to minimize CO2 is calling for the use of appropriate technologies. Progress by innovation. We support the development and expansion of renewable energy sources, of course, very important investments and progress there, renewables. We support increasing energy and resource efficiency, a lot of potential. We also know that fossil fuels will continue to play a major role in the coming years. Economic growth needs energy, and the perspective for 2050 is a population growth, an economic growth, and an energy growth. Energy, an additional energy demand of about 70% additional to today's demand. And mostly of this additional production, energy production, will be even fossil-based. Look into African countries, the blends there in Nigeria and in other countries. That's the reality. We wish something other, of course, but that is the reality, and there we need to have answers. And we also know, therefore, that we have to deal with this situation. And what Rafael told you, even the use of nuclear energy. We are here not in Germany. There you cannot even talk about this. But that's the reality worldwide. And this means deploying more technologies to cut CO2 emissions. That is especially important. And of course, hydrogen. Investments in hydrogen as an energy source of the future will decarbonize and transform the industry. Hydrogen is very important. We launched together with the Egyptian government and the Belgian government, UNIDO, a global hydrogen forum to talk and to discuss and invest in hydrogen as the energy of the future. But that lasts, we think the perspective is 10, 20 years. We start investments, of course, but that is not today's reality. Green hydrogen will lay the foundation for the renewable-driven future. And together we can build sustainable societies powered by innovation that work also for the world's most vulnerable. So thank you for this evening meeting and evening discussion and your interest. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Director General Gerd Müller, UNIDO. And I want to echo from you a message that solutions are there. We need more solution as well, but we have to focus on technological solutions and all broad suite of solutions to make progress in the decarbonization agenda. I think the three heads of agencies have outlined to us a very challenging agenda for the technical conversation, because you sounded optimistic. You said that there's a lot of solutions out there, but we need to get them implemented. So we need to unpack what is behind this. So maybe we can invite you to take a seat and join us in the conversation. Thank you very much. Another round of applause to you. So that's naturally bring me to my second part, our second part of the session, which is a panel discussion on a bit more granular discussion. How do we get there? So I have the pleasure of inviting to the podium or the panel, the table, Mr. Albert Muchanga, the Commissioner for Economic Development, Trade, Tourism and Industry, Minerals at the African Union Commissions, His Excellency Albert Muchanga. Professor Jeffrey Sachs, President of the Sustainable Development Solutions Network. Professor Sachs does not need an introduction. We all know Professor Sachs. Welcome to the podium. And I'd like to invite to the podium Professor Rademacher. Professor Rademacher. And joining us from the World Nuclear Association, Ms. Sama Bilbao Nguyen. Welcome. Am I saying the last name correct? Ilya. Thank you. And finally, from the International Energy Agency, Mr. Peter Levy. Welcome to the podium. So, my plan for the session is not to go by seniority. I have a choreography for the session, so I wanted to start with more of what are the points that I wanted to bring to the conversation to set the scene. So I think I want to start with Peter Levy from the International Energy Agency. You were mentioned twice by Mr. Grossi earlier about your analysis. The subject is the interplay of different technologies for decarbonizing the energy system and getting us to net zero, especially on the industrial side. We did a lot of analysis on this, so you've put a lot of projections, particularly to 2050, and some of these scenarios went on to 2050. Maybe just to bring the audience to sort of a more granular understanding, what are we talking about, what technologies and what pathways, and what amount of investment maybe we need for these technologies. Just a quick sort of, I know it's a difficult question, but but a quick sort of mapping of the pathways.
Thank you very much, Tariq. And we're certainly going in inverse order of seniority. I'm an analyst at the agency, but I'm involved in several areas of the modeling that we do. Something I should say at the beginning is that we do scenario modeling at the IAEA. So we do have a forecasting team, but what I'm involved in with our scenarios in the World Energy Outlook and in energy technology perspectives are really scenarios. They are versions of the future. They are possible futures for the energy system. And they tell different stories and cast different narratives on the future, depending on the assumptions and the definitions of those scenarios. The scenario that I want to briefly set the scene with, or just make really one statement about, is our net zero emissions by 2050 scenario. It's our normative scenario, recently updated in the latest version of the World Energy Outlook, released just 10 days or so ago. And this scenario, as its name suggests, delivers an energy system at net zero by 2050 without offsets beyond the energy sector. This is a highly ambitious scenario. This, in many instances, goes beyond the pledges that countries have made, and this is really a scenario that looks at the global implications of its eponymous goal. In this scenario, we find, perhaps unsurprisingly to many of you, that we really do need all technologies, all fuels. We need to look at pushing on each of these areas as much as we possibly can. We are really, pushing at the limits of technology deployment, and really the core message is that we need to push on all levers that we have available to us. I'm going to say one thing briefly about the industry sector, because that's where I work, and I think we are well covered here on the finance side and on the nuclear side, so I will leave those topics to my much more competent and knowledgeable panelists. But I think that in the industry sector we can see that there are, in the energy system overall, we can see that different sectors move at different speeds in this sort of hard to abate emissions. Lots of these emissions have to be dealt with in our scenario with technologies that are at relatively early stages of development today, and they face challenges either on the infrastructure side, on the cost side, or on the coordination side in the value chain and their supply chains. two categories in there that I would just highlight, again, because I think the others will be covered well by my fellow panelists. Hydrogen and CCUS technology families. I should note that these are families of technologies. This is not just one technology, of course. You deploy it in different applications and you'll have different costs, different alternatives that it's competing with. The thing I should say about these two technology groups, though, is that they are expensive. Hydrogen is an expensive form of an expensive energy carrier relative to the use of electricity directly in many instances. CCUS, similarly, compared to an unabated installation, it is a costly option. So our approach to these in the industry sector is really to use them where they are needed. Delivering industry material outputs from industry will be absolutely essential to serve the other sectors of the energy system for countries to build up their infrastructure. We cannot do away with the materials, but we cannot afford the emissions that come with them today. We need to overcome the challenges that those sectors have, that are inherent to those sectors, and hydrogen and CCUS technologies can help deliver them. High temperature heat, dealing with process emissions, and the use of hydrogen for chemical feedstock are three examples where judicious deployment of these technologies is certainly merited in the context of our scenario. One last caveat is that direct electrification technologies for these specific applications where we find hard to abate emissions are being pursued. Three specific examples would be alternatives to limestone in the cement sector that would negate the use of CCUS for process emissions, the use of synthetic fuel, which does involve carbon capture, but can be used as a feedstock to steam crackers, direct electrolysis of iron ore. This would then avoid the use for hydrogen. These options do exist, they are being pursued, but they are at comparatively even earlier stages of development, generally speaking, than hydrogen and CCUS technology families. So again, I'll underline the main message: all fuels, all technologies. This is that we need to push hard on all levers in order to develop this highly ambitious scenario outcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Peter, for setting this scene. And I think since we talked about sort of the interplay of the technologies, I just want to continue and jump to Ms. Sama, because you're from the World Nuclear Association, and I think you also can bring a bit of context on the, we understood that we need all these technologies, but there's also challenges in the social acceptance of this technology. How are you looking at these broad issues that affect both the social acceptance, but the financing, and particularly in the context of greater deployment of nuclear?
Well, thank you, Tariq. Thank you for the opportunity to join all of you in this conversation. We heard the challenge. We are all here because we all have this urgent challenge, massive challenge. However, it doesn't seem that we are really raising our goals to the size of the challenge. So I am here to give you a little bit of good news, and I truly think that nuclear energy does provide a golden opportunity to decarbonize the entire economy, and do so in a cost-effective and equitable manner. And remember those two things because they are very important. So this means that with nuclear energy, we are going to be able to provide clean, abundant, 24/7 affordable energy to everybody, everywhere. And this addresses some of the comments that we heard from the Director Generals before. So now, the question here is, nuclear energy provides 24/7 carbon-free electricity. We know this. It's been doing this for 5 decades and is currently the backbone of the carbon-free electricity at a global level. The good news is it can also provide carbon-free heat. And this is going to address some of what we just heard from Peter. We are going to be able to decarbonize other sectors, such as heating for industrial applications. We are going to decarbonize district heating and cooling for buildings. We are going to be able to produce hydrogen that could be also transformed in ammonia or synthetic fuels to decarbonize shipping or transport or many can be used as feedstock for industrial applications. But we can go beyond that. We can also use nuclear energy to produce fresh water, which, as you know, is going to become one of the very important commodities as we move forward. So all those things are going to be, as I said, a game changer. Now, the good news is that nuclear energy is a proven technology. As we've heard, it's been doing this for 5 decades, and clearly it can continue to do this. And not only that, we have the existing technologies that are proven, but there is a lot of new advanced technologies that are ready to be deployed very quickly. So we have small modular reactors, we have micro reactors, we have advanced reactors. Many of those are going to be demonstrated before the end of this decade. And again, these not only do what existing reactors do, but they have the opportunity to do additional capabilities that the existing reactors perhaps are not so well prepared for. So these are great opportunities. And another thing that is very important is historically nuclear energy has provided the fastest decarbonization in many countries. We saw this in France, we saw this in Sweden, we just recently saw this in the United Arab Emirates. So this is very fast decarbonization that also results in lots of jobs, lots of high-paid, stable, long-term jobs that are also going to help the local economy to grow and to continue to develop. So again, a lot of impacts there. And then the final good news that perhaps addresses more directly what you mentioned earlier is that nuclear energy can do all that with the smallest sustainability impact of all low-carbon energy sources. The UNECE recently released a report where they calculated the life cycle emissions and the life cycle impacts of all low-carbon energy sources. And obviously for greenhouse gases, you know that nuclear is always the lowest one. But beyond that, the impact on human health, the impact on ecosystems is also very, very low. So what this means is we are seeing, as Rafael mentioned earlier,
yes,
many countries all over the world that are asking, that are requesting the opportunity to use nuclear energy to actually be incorporated in their energy mix to address their, not only the decarbonization goals, but their sustainable development goals.
Thank you so much for pointing some of the, what we call the other sides of the equation that we need to pay to the jobs, the health, and discussing these technologies, not only just the cost benefit associated with the investment cycle. I want now actually to jump to the critical question that is, and I know it's both, I want to bring Professor Rademacher, Professor Jeffrey Sachs into the equation, and His Excellency Mr. Albert, because the question is, Africa is not a major contributor to emissions today, but if we look at the projection to 2050, the amount of material that we need, the growth in the economy, if we're looking at an industrialized Africa, we're looking at a massive amount of energy we need for development, for economic development. And we just heard today that some of these decarbonization technologies that we're looking at are also expensive and yet to be deployed at scale in some places. So the balancing act, how do we get the massive amount of energy that is needed for Africa industrialization and keep that in a trajectory that is near zero pathway? What is the thinking? So I want to start with His Excellency Albert. What is the thinking in the African context in terms of the way to get there? And I want to turn to Professor Jeffrey Sachs on how are we going to finance this? So, Your Excellency Commissioner.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We from the African Union are very happy to be in this panel this evening. I'll begin. Okay, I need to bring closer to me. I'll begin my intervention by saying that right now, Africa accounts for 17% of the global population, and that is going to rise to 25% of the global population by 2050. So that being the case, I think a huge population factor should be counted when we look at this issue of energy transition. Now, before we even look at the issue of energy transition, as we speak right now, close to 1,970 million Africans have no access to clean energy for cooking. And the majority of Africans also don't have access to electricity. So we need both to promote universal access to energy as well as move towards the green transition. How do you achieve that? That is the big question that is before us. And we at the African Union think that maybe one way would be to use the strategic and green minerals to promote localization of energy production. I think in the opening remarks, there was a talk of critical raw materials. We at the African Union call them strategic and green minerals. Now the big question, would that be acceptable to the people with access to technology? And that in itself brings in another element. And this is the issue of transfer of technology. If we have to localize production, how are we going to move into the question of transfer of technology? Throughout history, we faced the big problem of barriers to intellectual property rights. Will that play a big role here, or they are going to be a way of facilitating that we move in that direction? The numbers are huge. I think a lot of people have talked of trillions of US dollars over a period of 20 to 30 years. It's very, very difficult to see how that is going to be generated, but at the level of programming, the key questions that we need to address, will there be localized production of green energy? Will there be a transfer of technology? Those are issues that we need to really factor in as we look at the interplay of moving towards green energy. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor, yeah?
Thank you very much. Let me start just with a couple of basic points. Every scenario that has been done, including the superb scenario by IAEA, and I would say hundreds of studies, all come to the same basic idea about what we're after, which is a power sector that is zero carbon, strong electrification of transport and buildings, and green fuels, probably hydrogen being the principal green fuel for the so-called hard to electrify sectors. The scenarios are pretty clear, actually. Which kind of primary energy source one uses for the zero carbon power depends on local conditions. If you are in a desert, go for solar. You have a lot of land that is very low cost, you have a lot of sunshine, and you have therefore a lot of opportunity at extremely low cost. If you are in a mid to high latitude zone near the water, you'll probably go for offshore wind increasingly, which is coming down dramatically in value, and so forth. So that's where the choices really come in. Everybody's going to be riding in similar electric light-duty vehicles in the future. Public transport won't be that different. Steel will be made in a variety of ways that are low carbon. Ocean shipping will probably be hydrogen for long distance and electric for inter-island and coastal shipping and so forth. We'll move to a system, in other words, that is recognizable everywhere. And the big questions are how to choose the right structure of that system and how to get it built. And in low-income settings where there isn't even a system to begin with, how to build the system. Certainly don't build it as a fossil fuel system to be dismantled, build it as the system that you want for the future without having to strand assets in between. So that raises a number of questions. The first one is governments need a plan. Sorry, this cannot be sorted out by the market. This is mainly about land use, population centers, transmission systems, and what we're finding is probably the hardest part of everything is where do you site stuff? Nobody wants anything in their neighborhoods, period. Nobody wants power lines, nobody wants wind turbines, nobody wants nuclear plants. Everybody wants electricity, but no one wants anything near them. Okay? This is a problem. This is what politics is about. People do want electricity, though, so you need to design this. And even the economics is secondary, actually, to the public acceptability of what the system is going to be. But I think that this is a basic point. You need 25-year plans. You can't do this in short, ad hoc, contract here, contract there, NDC here. This needs a strategy. Look at a map. How is the power system going to look in 20 years? I think it's really important. Second major point. Every study shows it's a lot cheaper if you can trust your neighbor and have transboundary systems. It makes sense because a lot of the power that we need is intermittent. And if you have intermittent power, it's good to be connected with someone else that has intermittent power. When the wind's blowing where they are, maybe it's cloudy where you are, and vice versa, so that you can reduce the storage costs, raise the resiliency, and connect. This is Europe's idea, I hope, of European Green Deal, although even with the Green Deal, there's not very much interconnection discussion. It's more national planning, which makes no sense. So it's better to have a regional strategy. This raises a major question in this world. Neighbors should get along with each other. Infrastructure in international areas should not be blown up. It's a bad idea. And if we actually behaved properly, we could reduce the costs of all of this tremendously. This is where geopolitics really matters. And where Africa's decision to have a single energy market would be phenomenally important if implemented, tremendously important, and would allow Africa to build some large-scale infrastructure like Grandinga and other projects that cannot work if it's not within a transboundary context. So that, I think, is another point that I would emphasize. Another point that's very relevant for our discussion is countries would like to also produce some of the hardware for these new systems. So we should have solar module production in Africa, solar module production in Latin America, solar module production basically in not China also, because China produces most of our solar modules very well, by the way. They're very low cost, they're superb, they produce for the whole world, but we actually need a diversified production system as well. And I think that that's important for industrial strategy because DRC is asking, and Zambia, can't we also produce batteries? We've got everything here. We've got the cobalt here, we have the copper here. Can we do some of this ourselves? Because we don't want to just buy all of this. We'd actually like to produce it. So I think that that's another consideration that's important. It raises a fifth consideration that I want to mention briefly, which is critical minerals. Obviously, we need really a global agreement so that we don't have a new dramatic confrontation over critical minerals. And this is a big risk, in fact, and it's leading already to US, Europe, China feuding, which could be quite harmful for the world. And Africa has a lot to sell, and it should be able to sell this at good prices on a competitive basis and collect the revenues from these critical minerals, because that's crucial for development. And that brings me to the final point, which is finance. Energy systems are expensive, period. Zero carbon energy systems are not really more expensive or much more expensive than fossil fuel systems. And if you make levelized cost of energy calculations or levelized cost of electricity calculations, if you can get pretty good terms on financing, say 5% interest on a 30-year credit, then the zero carbon systems for power are about the same cost, or even cheaper in some cases, than the fossil fuel-based systems. That's how much technological progress there's been in the last 30 years. The prices have come down between 20 and 100-fold in all of this. But the problem for low-income countries is Africa can't get 5% interest financing. If African countries go out to the Eurobond market, they pay 12% interest. Then you can't finance this, period, no matter what kind of system. And then the IMF tells you, you don't really need electricity, you need to keep your debts down. And that is absolutely an impossible advice. You need electricity no matter what, period. There's no development without electricity. So this is the highest priority. We therefore need, and this is my last point, we need absolutely to scale up quality finance for development if this is going to work. And this is what every country in the developing world is saying at this meeting. We can't do this without finance. And I look at the numbers together with them every day, year-round. They cannot do this without finance. But here's the catch. The African Development Bank, which is a wonderful institution and it's got a big program for low-carbon energy, its total financing for everything, not just power, for everything is $12 billion a year for 1.4 billion people. Forget it. Impossible. You can't even come close to development with that. So I said to President Adesina, you should be operating at least 10 times that scale. And he said, that's a good idea. I said, I'll help you raise the paid-in capital. Because we need to get a real financing strategy, not talk. We're only talking here unless you can pay for the systems. And you can't pay for the systems at 12% interest. You can only pay for the systems at 5% interest. And so we need to get Africa at least $100 billion a year of energy finance at low long-term interest rates, not lower than we pay in the rich world, because Germany's paying for 30-year loans, it's paying 2% still. So why is Africa paying 12%? Because, by the way, that's a long story, but international capital markets don't work. They just don't work. And if you look at how much countries pay, even after defaults, the poor countries pay much more than the rich countries do, even taking into account default risk. So this system is rigged, because if you have a lot of money, you can borrow cheaply, and if you don't have a lot of money, you pay sky-high rates and you stay poor. So we need to fix that. That's my final thought. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Jeffrey Sachs. You nailed it down with a full strategy for development work. You need, you have to think of it as a system. You need a strategy that is long-term. You need to think also, produce some of the hard work locally, pay attention to critical minerals, and most importantly, the cost of capital matters to all the technologies, low carbon or non-low carbon, and so we need to scale up quality finance for the development in developing countries. I think these very five key nuggets to take with us from this. But focusing on the last one, in addition to the scaling up the quality finance for development, I want to move to Professor Rademacher, because he also have brilliant ideas on how we can finance the transition to low carbon technologies in developing countries. So Professor Rademacher, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Can you hear me? Does it work? Okay. I think the most important aspect is to be realistic. I see too many people with too many illusions, and the proposal they make, they are of the dream type, but they have little to do with reality. And for Africa, the main reality is population will double in 30 years. It means every 10 years the population of the European Union is added in Africa. In every decade, Africa will build more houses and infrastructure than Europe over the whole last century. And the question is, how will you do that? I found it very important what General Director Müller said. He said, the need for energy will grow by, let's say, 70% by 2050. Probably it is not realistic to organize this additional 70% with renewables and hydrogen. Now still there is the rest we have today, it's all still there. And however will you get rid of all that and replace it by something new, and who should pay for this? Will never work. So let's put it the other way around. It would be an enormous achievement if the fossil part of the energy will not grow anymore over the next 30 years. It's not clear whether this can be achieved, but we will have the same fossil energy part that we have today in 30 years. And if you look to mobility, we will not have a world with cars that are battery electric. The bulk of the cars in 2050 will still have a combustion engine. And the question is, do we have a way that they can do their job without adding CO2 in the atmosphere? I was so happy what was said about nuclear. Yeah, wonderful. Nuclear is reliable, and it doesn't put CO2 into the atmosphere, and that is the problem we have at the moment. More energy, much more energy, reliable, and so little possible CO2 as ever you can do. So the idea is the energy you use is not allowed to put CO2 into the atmosphere. But the point is not to get rid out of hydrogen, is not get out of coal, is not get out of nuclear. It is to get out of everything that puts CO2 into the atmosphere. So thank heaven we have nuclear, and thank heaven we have carbon capture. And we do the carbon capture while we build the renewable energies. And we need the renewables for what comes additionally. And we do need the carbon capture for the amount of energy we have today. And the system we have today has to run. Because what we do is like an operation on a beating heart. We have a living body. The living body is 8 billion people and soon 10 billion people, and everything must work. And we have 1.3 cars with combustion engine, and they will be used because we have no other cars. And this 1.3 cars are needed for the survival of the 8 billion people that are there, and 2 billion people will be added. So I think the most important message we should develop, and therefore I was so happy we have these 3 agencies here at the same time. And it's not agencies for renewable energy. There is more in the world than renewable energy. And we have to use all the tools we have, and we have to rebuild, but not destroy. And we have to build the new stuff on top, and it all amounts to 4 issues. One issue is renewable, and it has hydrogen with it. But hydrogen realistic, it was already said, hydrogen is very expensive. So what you can do with renewables and hydrogen to achieve a stable energy system is quite limited. For a stable energy system, you need the stuff that always works. And then you come to the nuclear, then you come to the fossil, and then you come to the carbon capture, and then you come to the cars with combustion engine, but they need a synthetic fuel, something on the basis of methanol, something you can do reasonably by using CO2 from power plants, combining it with hydrogen.
But Professor Rodemacher, I want you to take you to lead to the point, which is exactly, we understand that these are all possible, but the question, the challenge is how do we finance them? They come at a premium.
Okay, let me put the financing to it, yeah? It is completely clear that the carbon capture all around the globe has to be paid by the countries of the rich world. And it's also clear that if you use the synthetic fuels, they have to pay for the removals of the CO2, which leads to the nature-based solutions, which means reforestation, or it means you put coke into the ground to increase the fertility of the ground. So you use agriculture as a final source of CO2, but you pay for it. And to the degree you use combustion engines, you do the removals and pay for it, and by this you pay for the reforestation. So the money must go from the rich countries to the developing countries. And I close with one example. In Germany, we pay for the CO2 emissions we do. But then the state collects the money and puts it into German projects, like projects for battery electric cars. No, that money must go to the place where we suck out the CO2 from the atmosphere, and that is where the nature-based solutions are, and Switzerland does it right.
Indeed, it is a wonderful proposition, but I would imagine it's going to be a hard sell to politicians, so we have to really work on the selling of this. But this is a brilliant step. I think we have listened to perspectives that is at the macro level of how to move the needle on these issues, and particularly to also address some of the challenges to deploy these technologies at scale in a variety of contexts. I just wanted to use the opportunity that we are joined by one entrepreneur that is thinking big about these and has a plan to deploy these technologies. So I wanted to invite to the podium, if possible, Mr. Oprist, who is the founder of a fantastic concept that he wants to deploy at a scale that deals with the interplay of about 4 or 5 technologies mentioned here. So let's listen to briefly to his ideas and see how realistic. Please join the podium. Yes, so thank you very much, Tarek and Dr. Müller, for inviting me to this panel. I tried to present a new way of thinking, a more holistic way into the future. And the future, not only the next 10, 20 years or 200 years from now. And I'll give you an example. If you consider how much carbon has humankind released into the atmosphere, then you come to an equilibrium that it means a mountain of around 7,000 meters in front of us in pure carbon was released from us, because most of us, so in the last 50, 60, 70 years, are the guys who released all these CO2 in the atmosphere. And so it is clear, we did it, I did it, you did it, everyone here did it, and we are the responsible guys to remove this stuff out of the atmosphere. And that means that Paris Agreement is the right way, but it's way too short, way too short. We need a technology has the capability to remove this 7,000 meters high mountain out of the atmosphere in carbon. And it's not a question about CO2, it's a question about carbon. Fossil carbon is in the air. So we need a global and in large scale applicable technology. And the first step, and I'm totally with you with these solutions, has to be freeing humankind from fossil fuels. That means we do need a global energy carrier based on renewable energy in a liquid phase. Because most today fossil fuels coming in gas form, in oil, or in coal. So the easiest and best way for the future is to have a global liquid energy carrier. And then the second thing is, this energy carrier has also to provide the possibility to remove this huge amount of CO2 out of the atmosphere. And I think this new approach is also a very interesting one. It could unify the whole humankind in a really, really big goal and not on short steps into the future. And hopefully there is some interest on the technology. It is already in humankind's hands. Photovoltaic, electrolyzers, hydrogen, carbon capture. These are the key technologies we need as humankind for the future. So thank you very much, and feel invited if there's any interest on the technology. Thank you very much. You didn't get into the details of your project, but you briefly outlined as an ambitious venture that you're putting on the ground that combines these technologies. So we look forward to the discussion that you will present during COP and forward in getting the project off the ground. So thank you very much, Mr. Albrecht. I know we exceeded our time for this session, and I kept Mr. Grossi and Mr. Olga all along in this session. Thank you for keeping this thing. We have a fantastic panelists here, so I don't want to deprive the audience of asking questions as we have. If you allow me, I know Professor Sachs, you're busy, your schedule is busy, and Professor Rademacher, all of you are very busy, but let's give 5-10 minutes to the audience in case there are burning questions, contrarian positions on what you heard, clarifications. So any hands? Yes, there's one there at the back, please, if you have a microphone.
Thank you very much. I'm Stefano Casarini from Politecnico di Milano. I would like to have the view of Professor Sachs on nuclear for the Western countries. If I look at the picture today, it seems that the levelized cost of energy, also if I consider the storage of energy for solar and wind, is cheaper than nuclear. And if I look at the movies in the last 20 years, I see that renewable energy, solar and wind has decreased a lot, tremendously. So what's our take on nuclear energy? Because from an economic point of view, it seems to me that where there is the market of energy, it doesn't make any sense to talk about nuclear. Thank you.
Maybe let me take one more question so that we can bring them. Maher, there, please, in the audience.
Yeah, hi, Maher Chibo, Envision and member of the Committee of Engineers for Energy Transition. My question is about the infrastructure. I didn't hear the importance of getting the networks, for example, ready for a large, massive connection to the renewables. Whatever the technologies we are talking about, we need to keep in mind that there would be a lot of instability. The networks would not work if we get massive connection of renewables, massive electric cars, and so on, and there is a lot of investments in this infrastructure. So what's your view on that?
Thank you, and one more I see there from, yes, Louise.
Hello, I'm Luisa from the Council of Engineers for the Energy Transition, and my question is for Peter. So I want a futuristic question. Who is more prepared to produce green hydrogen? Is it Africa or Latin America?
Okay, we have 3 questions. Let's start with the Professor Jeffrey Sachs on your views.
Definitely nuclear will be used in certain countries, Japan, Korea, China, India, no doubt. In the United States, it would make sense to keep our nuclear fleet going. It was a mistake for Germany to turn it off, in my opinion, the sudden way that it did, and replace it by lignite for 10 years. That made no sense. France definitely will keep its nuclear fleet. Many countries in Central and Eastern Europe will. A lot depends on whether you have an existing nuclear program, public acceptance, structure, a national expertise, security, IAEA, good relations, and so forth. So I think there's no doubt that nuclear will continue to play a significant role in electricity. I think for a lot of new investments in the U.S., it looks like wind, especially offshore wind, by the way, but wind, solar will probably outcompete new nuclear plants for most uses, unless there's some terrific breakthroughs in modular new generation plants that really are lower cost, passive safety systems, and public acceptance, and for some niche geographic areas where it really makes sense to have that. If you look at Japan, though, there are not great alternatives other than going back to the nuclear right now. They're not blessed with huge amounts of sunshine. It's not easy to run the Japanese economy on wind power alone. So I think nuclear is definitely going to be, and it's, Fukushima set it aside for 10 years, but it's coming back as a matter of necessity.
Thanks.
I'm hardly the expert in this room on this, but my view is that it will play an important role but I doubt that it will outcompete alternatives in places that otherwise have good wind, solar, and don't currently have a nuclear fleet. I doubt that a lot of countries will get started in that, other than for reasons that probably I wouldn't love, which is dual use potential. And so some countries may still pursue this because they have aspirations in other ways. Again, I'm not the expert on that. I'm just a little worried. But in general, there's definitely a role that will be significant.
Thank you, and I say that's I understand I wanted to jump in as well from the perspective of the...
Yeah, so perhaps I have a different perspective. I mean, based on the 2020 IAEA report on the projected cost of electricity, the reality is that nuclear energy projects are competitive with all other low-carbon energy sources. And that is particularly true if you are looking at the entire cost of the system. As you know, nowadays we can no longer look at the levelized cost of electricity as a true measure of the cost of an energy source, because we need to look at the cost and the value of intermittency, of energy security and energy independence, the cost of stability of the grid, etc., etc. So when you take into account all those things, and if you were to have markets that adequately price and value all those essential attributes, you realize that nuclear energy not only is competitive, but is going to be absolutely essential. And as we said before, I mean, there is no way we cannot have an energy system that does not include most low-carbon energy sources. So I have a...
Okay, I wanted to thank you, but maybe I want to also follow up, because you mentioned the question, there was a question related to that, the cost of infrastructure and the interconnections. Was anyone wanted to jump into that question from Professor Rademacher? Yes. And I will come back to you, Peter, with the last question.
I think that the argument that the production of energy with solar or wind is cheap is not an argument that really helps. We see that in Germany. The more renewables, the more expensive is electricity. And the reason is that we get the electricity not in the moment when we need it. The real problem is you have a cheap electricity at the moment where you don't need it, and when you urgently need it, you have no electricity. And if you want to build an industrial society, and if you want to produce steel and ships and chemistry and glass, then you need a reliable energy all the time on the level of seconds and then on the level of voltages. And to deal with this volatility is the major problem. That is where nuclear can help. That is where fossil help. So as long as you have nuclear, fossil, or other stuff that is reliable, let's say to 50%, then you can balance the renewables with the 50%. If the renewables go towards 100%, the whole thing becomes extremely expensive if you want a stable system for an industrialized society. If you only want a local grid, it's different. The same is true with the, you say we need all the grids. Yeah, we need the grids. You even need the digitalized grids if you go with renewables. It's extremely expensive.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Rademacher. But I think there's also, you're absolutely pointing to a challenge, but also there's also a balancing perspective that you can also achieve if we get out of the nation state and we think regionally and a more integrated sort of power system, maybe we can overcome some of these challenges. So I think the point that Professor Sachs raised about look at your neighbors, but that also raises all kind of geopolitical questions. Maybe Professor Sachs wants to jump into it.
I just wanted to recommend, and we have IAEA here that does such wonderful work. You can make very usefully different scenarios with nuclear, without nuclear, at different scales, with CCS, and so forth. And it's really worth doing, as imperfect as it is, to look at these issues, to do one's best. And I think the IAEA modeling team is superb. Give us mid-century scenarios with different categories. We did that for the United States. The scenarios that underpin the recent legislation were done by a team that is part of our network, and they have a no nuclear scenario. They have a nuclear, no CCS, with CCS, a different biofuels, a set of assumptions. And they're very interesting. And if you want the lowest cost system, you use a bit of all of it, for sure. So you have a whole portfolio. If you take something off the table and you optimize, you're going to end up with a higher cost, but maybe you've optimized against a different constraint. But you can measure these things, what the trade-offs are to in important extent, and I think scenario building is really an important tool for being able to discuss this systematically.
Absolutely, absolutely, and that's a good transition to Peter, because the last question was for you also on where the cost, the cost advantage in terms of production of hydrogen.
If you'll permit me a brief response on the homework we've been set by Professor Sachs, just to answer that we have done some of this homework already. We've explored a low CCUS and a low nuclear variant or sensitivity analysis in our net zero by 2050 roadmap, and the message is very much along the lines that Professor Sachs has already outlined, which is possible but gets more expensive. There are lots more nuances to that, but really this kind of going with all options and all technology options and pushing hard on all of them is the best way. Just to come back on the question I was asked, I'm going to answer this like a politician answers the question of two sports teams playing within their jurisdiction, who do you favour for the match? And I would answer both good teams. But I think that, you know, Africa and Latin America, they're both very big places. There's to talk about them as a homogeneous zone or region in either case with respect to hydrogen, I think would be an oversimplification. Something that I can point you to, though, is our project database, which we track all of the low-carbon hydrogen projects that are going on around the world, low-emissions hydrogen, I should say. And in there we look at all the projects that are actually planned, reached FID, concept projects, and we try and catalogue all of these. This is freely available on our website, and hopefully that will bring some real numbers and meat to the answer.
Okay, well, I think I'm getting the signal that we have exceeded our time for the session, and maybe they want the room for something else. But it's a very interesting conversation, very relevant conversation, and important for us also to raise the advice that we give to governments and to international actors that are involved in the space, is that what are the options and how to get there. We talked about that all options are necessary, but the challenge always remains on how to really get there, and we think we got some nuggets here in terms of long-term planning. Don't think only within the boundaries of your country, maybe you have to think regionally. Cost of capital and few other pointers that would help us move forward. So with this, I want to thank very much all the panelists. If you join me in really thanking them for your time and for being with us, thank you very much. This is a wonderful partnership between the three international agencies, and I want to thank particularly His Excellency Grossi and Ms. Olga for being with us and for supporting this, and Dr. Müller, he just left, but thank you all for getting this moving. Thank you.